anxiety.
Feel.
This is Into the Fog with Peter Laws. I don't know if I'm familiar with this name.
And you sense it the moment you step onto the land. And for 111... Some houses just feel twisted, and you sense it the moment you step onto the land. And for one 11-year-old boy, that place was his family home, a run-down property in a New Zealand forest. But in the back garden of this house stood an abandoned stone building, its walls covered with strange markings and obscene drawings that looked less like graffiti and more like ritual. The place already had a sense of paranormal power, but when Toby was forced to sleep alone in one of the dark bunkhouses, he was plunged into the most terrifying night of his life. But the terror did not stay at the bunkhouse, because what followed would grow even more disturbing, including a genuinely chilling link to a devastating real-life double murder. Tonight, told publicly for the first time ever, one boy's haunting, one tragic real-world horror linked by a supernatural mystery that refuses to fade. And keep watching until the end, as we reveal a chilling piece of information we uncovered about the history of this very spot that implies that there were strange things walking through these woods long before Toby and his family ever set foot on the land. I'm Peter Laws, and you and I are about to walk into the fog. I receive so many emails from viewers of this channel, and I'm grateful for it. And I got one from a man from New Zealand who was finally sharing his paranormal experience after 40 years. Now, I know his real name, but he would prefer to keep that private, so I'll respect that. So we're going to call him Toby. Telling of his encounters affected Toby emotionally, but he hopes that by sharing this, he might help others not feel so alone when they too run into the inexplicable. Maybe some of you out there know exactly what that feels like. Well, his story revolves around a rather unique property that had been in his family for years. It stood in the northwest of Auckland in New Zealand, in a place called Greenhithe, which is surrounded by harbour waters and tidal creeks. Now again, I won't tell you the specific address, but I will say the street name. It's called Rame Road. These days, Rame Road in Greenhithe is a leafy, pretty suburb, but back in the 1980s when Toby lived there, the area was far more rural and isolated with far fewer road links. The house was surrounded by a forest with a dirt track that led to a nearby beach. The property was even more remote when Toby's great-grandfather built the place. He constructed the house and the outhouses at a time before the area even had a water supply or electricity. Now, to help you get an idea of how odd this location was, you need to get your head around the layout of this property. Look at this map that I asked Toby to draw for us. The main house had a living room, a kitchen, and one bedroom. But it also had separate bunk rooms built away from the main property. Even the bathroom was separated from the main house. Even in the 1980s, Toby told me that they had no running water. The only source was a tank from which they collected water from the rain. The house and the outbuildings were mostly made of wood, apart from one. That was older than the others and was made of stone. It wasn't big, only about 3 by 4 meters. And it was mostly used to store junk. Toby can remember his grandmother's old pram for when she was a baby, sat amongst the spider webs in there.
It's like high
But what
protein.
always got under Toby's skin were the walls of the stone house. They were covered in handprints, as if someone had dipped their palms and fingers into various colored paints and just pressed their hands against the stone. Or like someone had frantically crawled up and around and across those walls. I share spooky things here, so how's this for spooky? I lost my earbuds recently and I searched...
It's the restaurant I grew up in.
And the artwork was rough and amateur.
Oh, it looks like
It
an
was created
orgy.
with a large artist's paintbrush, it seemed, but skilled enough to know exactly what was going on. Toby described these images as lewd and sexual.
Yeah.
He said no more than that. Now,
No,
I didn't
no.
know
Why you
what
don't
that...
have anything to apologize for? It was aptly timed. I had enough of that jerk anyway. It's good timing. We're good. You're good.
Exactly. Did he mean that these drawings were just simply naked or something more explicit? So I asked him to describe these paintings in plain language. So he...
See, that's what I mean. You're apologizing when I don't feel like you offended me. Meaning that you give a crap about how I feel. You're good. No, you're just fine.
He said that these paintings were incredibly crude and graphic drawings of many different women. In the pictures, most of the women were masturbating, while some were pulling their own breasts in a grotesque, painful fashion, far beyond the physical limitations of their bodies, almost like they were made of rubber. There were some male figures too, but they never stood alone like some of the women did. The males were always pictured in various sexual positions with the females. Toby told me this. Whoever did them was no artist. It almost looked like graffiti, but also somewhat ritualistic. One image had one of the women squatting down on one of the fingers of one of the handprints. That was about the most creative. Now, the living room of the main house did have some 1960s black and white wallpaper, which also featured naked women. But the images on the stone walls were just different. They were unsettling and handmade. As you might imagine, the stone room prompted the adults of the family to joke that orgies must have taken place in this building. But the grandmother suggested that it was deeper than that.
Yeah, I just don't want to give the people who don't deserve my attention the attention. I'm like, they want so desperately to chase clout, but you're good. They're just not important. I don't care about them. Karma comes. So do legal penalties.
She thought that this old stone hut could have been a gathering place for local witches to carry out their rituals.
Yeah, it's been gross.
I looked into newspaper reports from this area of New Zealand, and there are articles that make claims about satanic cults and witchcraft covens. Not that that's the same thing, of course. But while examples aren't common, there is evidence of people in the area being genuinely scared of witchcraft. For example, I found a shocking report from the Auckland Evening Star from July 1893, where a Maori healer was alleged to have treated 200 locals for witchcraft, many of whom were children. But get this, the healing system involved pouring boiling water onto their bare bodies and then applying hot mashed potatoes to their skin.
Sad.
The article says, in some instances, the flesh peeled off. 50 deaths are attributed to this treatment. Now, was this story from that newspaper true or false? The paper itself wasn't sure. But the point I'm trying to make is that the phrase witchcraft or the occult was not unheard of in that area. And back in the early 1980s, this stone house with its arcane paintings and naked flesh and the weird handprints certainly looked the part of a forbidden site for secretive cult worship. But it wasn't just the walls, you see. The stone house itself had an ominous atmosphere about it. For a start, it stood in a forest not too far from the beach, and so there was plenty of wildlife in that area. But the animals, on the whole, would stay away from the stone house. Toby remarked that there was a weird silence that always hung around that place like a cloak. And those animals that did come close would react in very peculiar ways. For example, if cats ever wandered close to the stone house, they would switch personalities and go from placid to sudden aggression, hissing and arching their backs as if to protect themselves. But from what? However, the worst were the birds. They would sometimes fly close to the house, and when they did, they would just
Yeah,
die.
my life does matter. That's why I smoke,
The
and I
family
don't care what
were
you think.
always finding bodies of dead birds
Sure.
scattered in the dust around this stone house. These little birds would be lying everywhere, he told me. And it happened so frequently that Toby said he would witness sometimes the birds in the throes of death, just lying on the soil, gasping their last breaths in the shadow of that place. Even though most animals stayed away from these buildings, there was one creature that did the opposite. Wasps. There were 4 wasps' nests scattered around the property.
Wasps in the chat.
And these large, hornet-like wasps were aggressive, and they seemed to thrive there. And the uneasy vibe of that little stone house seemed to seep outwards to the other outbuildings and the house itself. The reactions, you see, were weird from people. Sometimes Toby's mother would have people over to stay, presumably sleeping in the bunkhouses, only to be plagued with horrifying and deeply vivid nightmares. Yet the truly crazy part was when they shared their dreams over breakfast the next morning.
They had the same
Others
dreams.
would turn cold and say, I had the same dream.
No way.
And what was this
It's probably a
shared
ghost.
nightmare, you may be wondering? Well, they would all dream that they were being chased through
Yeah,
the
it's probably a
forest by
ghost
some
memory.
kind of bear-like creature. Toby's grandmother had this dream a lot. Water had a weird habit of evaporating more quickly on this property than usual. Toby remembers, for example, leaving a glass of milkshake out on a bench, and by the next morning it had somehow returned to dried powder. Now, I'm aware of strange water puddles appearing in paranormal cases, but the idea of rapid evaporation in the paranormal, that's kind of new to me, so let me know if you know anything about this sort of phenomenon.
Can affect temperature. That would affect evaporation.
Well, despite the quirky layout, the ominous feelings, the nightmares, the effects of this place, Toby and his mother continued to live there. Why? Well, it's simple. They had no other option. They were struggling for money. His mum gave birth to him when she was a teenager, and his dad was no longer on the scene. Back in the 1980s, his father was either in prison or in a psych ward, he told me. Though Toby told me later that he did meet up with his dad when he was a teenager, and he discovered that his dad was interested in the occult and taught him how to use tarot cards. Despite his dad being out of the picture back in the 80s, though, there was another man around. His mother had a boyfriend, a new boyfriend. He happened to be a gambling addict.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the little money that the family made would tend to be blown on his bets. In other words, they had little option but to stay in one of the only things that was part of the family, that was belonging to them. The strange little house. Built many years ago by the great-grandfather. Well, having a troubling feeling in a house is one thing, but what happens when the troubling becomes the all-out terrifying?
All right, Leo, since you and Austin, you didn't mean to bring it up, but you... Long live Queen, hail to the Fae Knights. Love you guys. Austin said she copies just everything I do relentlessly. That's true. And one of the things she did was she copied one of my outfits one day. And I mentioned what she was doing. And I said, basura. And I was calling her trash. Which I don't think she understood. I don't think she understood that I wasn't saying a name. I was speaking a language, a real language, and I was calling her trash in Spanish. So she copied my outfit in the color spectrum, which was orange. And she even copied, like down to the armband, the exact same armband I was wearing. And she named the quote-unquote original character that she dressed like my outfit Basura. It was like she tried to spell out what I was saying, but didn't realize it was a real Spanish word. And that I was calling her trash in another language while she was copying me, which is trash behavior. And she named the character she copied even after my outfit, and even the color spectrum I was wearing, down to the body jewelry. Basura, because while I was wearing that outfit, or over the couple of days of wearing that outfit, it was one of the things I said, Basura. I was on a live feed like this. I was wearing an orange outfit. She's a loser. She needs to stop. She's going to get it. That's right. I mean, just changing a name also doesn't make it an original character. These people are confused. Why does chicken heads? Chicken. Austin, I was given a Easter card. You know, what do they call me sometimes? Little bunny. One little bunny and a sea of chicken heads. Legit. Chicken heads. What me? I think she didn't know it was Spanish. No, and she named it Basura. Like, no, you have to roll the R and it's real. It's a real word. Spanish. Basura. Trash.
Which is precisely what would happen when the uneasy atmosphere of that...
And that was just one character. Original character in the movie. But no more. I was quietly sitting on that. I wasn't going to talk about it. Since you kept bringing it up. It's a little funny. Fucked up. Funny. It's just, you look so dumb right now. Oops.
To manifest itself one terrifying night. Brace yourself for what you're about to hear.
Cranky.
Can you remember how I said that the main house had only one?
Don't talk about club nights, lit, no paint chips. That's right. Because they want attention. The narcissists in general want attention. No. They're all pretty much the same. She just thinks she's important because she's had more followers than a lot of them, but that doesn't make it any different or any better. It makes her worse. Especially since she targeted children as her main audience.
If at 11 years old you had to sleep in a separate building from your family, like you were camping out every single night in the woods. Only you were also much closer to the strange and disturbing stone house with all those crude pictures on the wall. I asked Toby, why did the property have these detached bunk rooms? Like, why didn't the great-grandfather just build the rooms into the main house? Toby said he had absolutely no idea why. He just figured that they were a place for people to stay, for guests to have some privacy. Well, one night, Toby was lying on his bunk, listening to the hiss of the dark trees that surrounded him. Perhaps he could hear the groan of the sea on the other side of the forest.
Chips.
Then, amongst the familiar
I don't know about
sounds
those
came a new
chips.
thing.
But I got a
Something
chip right here with some homemade raspberry
was
jam.
stirring in the woods outside. The sound grew into a horrible, violent whine that quickly transformed to two hideous squeals. And he soon realized that this skin-tightening wailing was coming from two cats. They were fighting out there, and they were close too. Can you remember how I said that cats always became violent when they were close to the stone house? Well, that's where these two wild animals must be right now. And they were going absolutely crazy.
Some vanilla
Young
strawberry
Toby
jam.
pulled his cover close. He'd heard cats fighting before, but this was on an entirely different level. They didn't just sound like they were fighting.
And it is just as delicious as it looks. I was just going to say, it looks
decimating each
delicious.
other. But more than that, the frantic, violent energy of these cats seemed deliberate. The more he lay there, forced to listen to this violence, the more Toby began to feel that these sounds were not just happening near to him, they were happening for him. As if this horrible racket was carefully and gleefully being directed at this little boy. This fighting went on for about an hour. But that would be the least of his problems that night. Because after what seemed like an eternity, something else came. And the sound was smaller, perhaps, but
I made it.
Closer, much
No
closer.
sugar in it.
He listened to it. Tap, tap.
It's very easy.
Tap, tap. A chill slid down his...
I make it. Fruit has pectin in it naturally. So I don't add pectin. I don't add like gelatin or anything. Depending on the recipe, I like it tart, even the raspberries. I like it very tart, so sometimes I won't add anything. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of honey, depending. Is it cheat day? No, I've been fasting most of today. Also, do you know what I've been eating? Nothing unhealthy. Protein mix. I just made cookie dough out of it, but it was just like a very high protein. This is just fruit and chia seeds. Just whole foods. Whole foods, really. But I'm fasting today mostly. So I need to eat eventually. And even if it was, what does it matter? Weird. Don't pick at people or what they do or don't. No, don't do that. Go mind your own refrigerator. I'm not talking about the people who are curious. I'm talking about the rude one because I saw that.
As realization struck, that was the bunkhouse window, which was right above his bed.
Gluttonous, so gluttonous. 6 tortilla chips and 2
something
bites of
was
jam.
tapping on the window to his room. Every
Per
nerve in his
flavor.
body fired, but he refused to
spoonfuls
look,
of jam.
and so he just stared in the other direction. His mind stumbling over itself to
So
find
terrible.
a rational explanation. It's a branch, he told himself. There's a branch in the breeze, it's tapping on the window. But he knew it wasn't a branch. There were no trees close enough to the window to do that.
You know what I had in the bowl?
The fighting cats grew.
Chickpeas and tomato sauce. It's like pizza. High protein, though. Glutton is where?
Even more violent and frenzied, so unhinged that it was hard even to believe that they were cats, but almost like something
Eating well
like
is the
something pretending
lifestyle.
to be cats, something wearing their voices.
But
as it became bolder
like I
and
said,
bolder.
while it might be high protein and full of good stuff, I did make it into cookie dough. It's not that I don't like other stuff. Also, the flour in this is not flour. It's almond flour. So what is that? More protein. And my eating, somebody said, what about the sugar? There's no sugar in it. Monk fruit, a little monk fruit, but it's no calorie in it. Doesn't hit the glycemic index the same. So, am I eating raw cookie dough? Yeah. But is it also made of whole foods and very high protein? Yeah. Is it delicious? Yes. Do I miss other regular cookie dough as a result? No. No, it hits the spot.
The become itself. But worst of all was the tapping sound which went on.
Can I hear you?
On, tap, tap, tap,
I can hear you.
Tap. Persistent,
Often.
insistent, clear enough to notice the lack of a lower frequency to the tapping.
And it doesn't have egg
think
in
about it.
so
Fingertips, if you tap them
keep it
against
raw.
glass,
But, yeah.
they make that lower boop, 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 boop. This tapping was harder and sharper. Not
I'm very full now,
fingertips.
though. I need some water. But that's it.
Fingernails.
But that's
And the
creepy.
consistent high frequency of this implied a distance from the fingertips. In other words, these fingernails were long. His immediate thought wasn't, there's a creature out there with claws. He just kept thinking, it's a woman. There's a woman tapping on a little boy's window in the middle of the night. And if he was to finally turn to face her and look up at that window, what might he see behind the glass looking down? And what kind of eagerness might he see in her eyes? Just then,
I heard that. Somebody's like, I'm sorry I was picking at at me. My choice isn't, thank you. Appreciate that. Just don't do it again, please. I might be secure in what I do and my lifestyle, but other people might not be. And it's just not a very nice thing to do or way to be. It's just not a nice energy. So please don't do that to people.
a shift in the atmosphere.
I forgive you, but don't do it to
The
anybody else.
walls, the ceilings, the corners
Don't
of
do
this
it to me
room,
again.
they gradually began to pick up a kind of growing blue light. As if whatever was at the window was starting to emit some sort of glow, and it was casting shadows into the room. And these shadows, he thought, as he flicked his eyes to the pools of blackness in the room, these shadows were moving. His skin began to prickle. There were things moving in those shadows inside the bunkhouse. As if in response, the blue glow increased, and he went to look at it finally. And he saw through the window a blue-gray swirl turning a little faster than a twist of smoke. But what turned his mouth dry was that the swirl had something inside it. He stared in disbelief as a figure emerged. A pitch-black silhouette of a man wearing some kind of hat. This was the moon. The hinge point of it all. Up until now, Toby was too terrified to leave his bed. Now he was too terrified to stay. He flung his covers back, and with all the vulnerability that brings, he leapt off, his bare feet slapping on the cold floor, and he raced for the door. And as he began to run, it felt like he was making no progress, like that nightmarish dream state when you're running to escape harm, but the exit is sucked away from you all the while your pursuer claws itself closer. And it was then that he got the distinct impression that whatever lurked in the shadows within the room was laughing at him. Now,
Somebody's asking about the jam. You want me to teach you how to make the jam? Let me know.
when you heard that detail about getting sucked back, you may be thinking that he was dreaming here. He wasn't. Because he finally made it to the door, he turned on the light, and then he rushed out of the bunkhouse across the dirt.
At minimum, you're going to need 2 ingredients. I like to use frozen often. Just like frozen strawberries. Like they're fresh, flash frozen, but they're frozen. Raspberries or strawberries. I guess you could really use anything, but I like raspberry and strawberry. And then chia seeds. If you want it a little bit sweeter, you can add some honey, maybe. But let's say you have like a bag 12-ounce bag, raspberries, frozen raspberries. This in a pan, maybe like a drizzle, I don't know, like a teaspoon or a tablespoon or two of honey, tops. Just depends on whether you want any. Sometimes I don't add any at all, and I'm perfectly fine with it that way. I like it tart though. And then chia seeds. Put this in a saucepan on like medium low heat until it starts to bubble. Just let it sit until it starts to bubble. It'll melt and then it starts to bubble, or like thaw, and then it starts to bubble. And when it starts to bubble, if you wanted to add any sweetener, like a little drizzle of honey, a little bit of honey, a teaspoon or a tablespoon or two, tops, right? You don't have to add any. Then I'll go over it, not right this second, but I'll come back and we'll make some together. Let that cook for another minute or so. You don't want it to burn, so keep it relatively low, like medium low, maybe low-ish, but once that's mixed, you add a couple of tablespoons. Usually I'll add, I just eyeball it, so it's a little bit hard for me to do the measurements, but it's like maybe 2 cups of berries, 2 or 3, I don't know, teaspoons or tablespoons, depending on what you want for thickness, of chia seeds, and if you want a bit of honey, and that's legitimately it. It takes me less than 5 minutes to make a big batch. Same with strawberries, but the strawberries have more of a water content, so you want to be mindful of that, meaning I cook them down a little bit longer. Like, you don't want to burn them, so keep it lower, but cook them a bit longer so that some of that water is taken out and it's not runny. Also, when I like to make the like homemade Reese's cups kind of, but I'll do jam cups, and I use that. Used to make, rice with chia seeds. It's good, they're good for you. But between the natural sugars and the pectin and the fruit, and then the chia seeds acting as a thickener, you don't need to add any of the extra stuff. You don't need to add any gelatin. You don't need to add any like outside pectin. You're using the pectin and the cooking process in the fruit to gel up with the seeds. So it's very, very simple. I like to add a little bit of vanilla to the strawberry. I don't like the vanilla in the raspberry. Tried it once, won't do it again. It wasn't terrible, but like it was not, I don't know. No. And I like it tart. You don't have to keep it tart. Sometimes I don't add anything. It's just let the fruit shine, and I love that. It's very simple, but it's so good. Do I put no, I don't. I like it kind of chunky. You could puree it, and it would make a really fine, like, it would still be a jam, but more like a jelly kind of jam. I get that a lot, actually. Raven from Teen Titan. But if you're doing strawberry, cook the strawberries down more. Just mash them with a fork in the pan. But yeah, you could do that, or if you didn't want to, like some people can't have seeds or grains, but if it was a puree, they could tolerate it. You could do that too. Just make sure it's soft and not super hot when you pour it into the blender. Or if you do, make sure you remember that the steam will create tension, so make sure it doesn't explode on you. Actually, Raven, I remember that one from growing up. She's kind of a badass, so it's not an insult. I'm not mad about it. And when I look back at myself in the screen and I think about what she looks like, do you know what she looks like? I can kind of see what they're saying. I can see it. Like a real life Raven. Like, look at this and can't be mad at them for thinking that. They're not wrong. Like, I do kind of look like that. They're not wrong. Can't be mad. And I have the widow's peak here too. Goes back. The widow with a widow's peak. And so does Raven. They're not wrong. I do kind of look like that. But like a real life version. That's okay. Yeah, cook the strawberries down more, especially if you're freezing them. Like I use the jam and then I make Reese's cups. So I'll use whatever nut butters that I'm using and I'll put a spoonful of jam in them and then I'll do the top of like usually dark chocolate, always dark chocolate actually. I don't know why I said usually, it's always dark chocolate. And I like to freeze them. Keep them in the freezer. They just keep well that way and I like them that way. But I noticed the first time I made the strawberry jam, when I did that, they were, you know, when stuff that has a higher water content freezes, it's kind of like icy. I didn't like that. The raspberry jam was more like jelly, like soft. It stayed kind of not fully soft, but it wasn't like icy the way that the strawberry jam was. And so the next time I made it, I cooked the strawberries down even more, and it didn't do that. It didn't have enough water content to do that. It was more of like a jelly or consistency. And that's really it. You could freeze it if you wanted to after to store it. Just make enough to eat for the week. You can add it in all kinds of things. Top of ice cream, it would be good, or whatever, nice cream. If you're making nice cream, it would be good. Breakfast, it would be good. And yogurt, you could make little parfaits or something with it, whatever you want. All of those things subsequently are customizable to dietary preference and lifestyle. You could do coconut yogurt if you are lactose sensitive. You could do like I said, nice cream, like frozen bananas and blended frozen bananas, or sorbet or something if you are lactose sensitive. The jam would be good either way. Because there's no processed white sugar, because there's no other stuff in it. It hits all the good nutritional points without any extra nonsense. And especially if you add a bit of honey, it's even better for an anti-inflammatory lifestyle and diet. And that's a big thing. Do you know why I started making this also? Most jams have sugar in them. I tend to avoid sugar, or I'll use typically natural substitutes. Honey or maple, preferably. But there are other ones. Monk fruit's a good one. And coconut sugar in a pinch. But I didn't want the inflammation from the sugar. And I found this jam that didn't have any of that. I also don't like how sweet it is. I don't like my raspberry jam sweet. I want it tart, like a raspberry. And so sometimes I'll add, another thing, I didn't mention this, but you can add lemon too. Usually I add a squeeze of lemon, half a lemon or 1 lemon. Make sure to de-seed it, of course, before putting it in there. But that also can extend the shelf life a little bit. You don't have to put that in there. You can. I like to, typically. Very simple. But they had these little jars, like this big, little, it was called Chia Smash Jam. And they still sell it. It's delicious. Except for it's like $8 for a little jar of it. I'm like, fuck that. I can make so much more of it myself. So I figured out, it took me a try or two, but I figured out how to duplicate it. Except mine is better. I make a lot more of it for a lot less. And the colors are better because it's fresh as well. In the jar, it's kind of like, it's not brown, but like it kind of turns, like when pink and red loses its pigment, it kind of gets this like weird, I don't know, almost like a brownish tinge. Mine does not look like that. It's bright red. And it doesn't have any sugar. And there's so much more of it. Cranky. They're cranky. Somebody hates their job. Ten out of 10 recommend. So props to Chia Smash though. But there's no fucking way. I go through it too fast. And mine is better.
Forget their faces. Never talk to them again.
What area of the house you were in?
Partially because I tweaked it to my precise preferences, partially because it's fresh. But I definitely was... My aim was to make it at least as good as theirs. I just figured out how to make it better for me. But props to Chia Smash. That's the brand. Absolutely. Chef's kiss. If I didn't have access to like stuff to make it myself, or like let's say I was I don't know, I was traveling or something and I wanted some, but I didn't have all the stuff or I didn't have access to whatever it was. I didn't want to cook it and I was staying in a place that, whatever. I would get it off the shelf. That one, that specific one. But I just make big bags of it myself with fresh ingredients.
You were watched.
Because I
You
love
quit
jam. I just don't
talking.
want the sugar and the junk in it and the
Wouldn't
additives.
answer a
And
question.
even like the stuff
Kept
to make it
walking
gel up.
around
I
the
don't want that
rooms.
shit.
He
Just
kept
use the
walking
natural
around the
pectin.
rooms. I didn't
Add some
tell
chia
him what
seeds.
happened.
Call
I
it a
didn't tell
day.
him what I had seen.
Keep it simple. No reason to add a bunch of garbage to it.
Ginger lay there, wondering how it had gotten to this point. The gentle sounds of the lake lapping at the nearby shore.
Yes.
The tree branches providing her
The
a
trolls
kind
have
of
gotten
natural
their
ceiling.
stairs.
The moon shining down from above. But this wasn't a camping trip. Ginger was curled up on the dirty ground below, desperately trying.
Oh, this is the wrong one. I do want to hear that one though. Let me give another few minutes of this.
If that was me, I'd have been terrified in that moment. The thought of stepping outside of that bunkhouse into the night, knowing that whatever tapped those fingernails may well be scrambling around the house to greet him. But no, he was so frightened now that he couldn't think of anything else but to get to the main house. To get.
I think we're gonna pause that one right there.
Lay warm. She needed sleep.
I like the taste.
She was so desperate for sleep. She looked up, staring through the tree line at her house. Inside were her family, her bedroom, her bed. But she couldn't bring herself to go back inside. It's not like she would be getting any sleep in there either anyway. And at least out here she was safe. But that was when it hit her. She was safe. Her children, on the other hand, were still inside with it, whatever it was. Yet still she couldn't bring herself to stand up and walk back inside. Just one more night sleeping in the woods. Just one more. Once I can finally get some sleep, I can figure out what to do. My mind will be clear. I will find a solution to the nightmare that is our home.
Okay, hon.
Inside, no one else was asleep either. In their beds, the children lay there, covering their ears and crying. Downstairs, her husband hammered on the keys of his organ, sweating, screaming, lost to madness. Tonight we're heading down to the Land O'Lakes for a good old-fashioned haunted house story. And who knows, maybe a friend might come along for the ride. Welcome to the tape library. Get yourself a warm drink, dim the lights and get comfortable. This is the terrifying story of the Summerwind Mansion. Before we jump into this, I haven't asked this question for a long time, so I'm curious about the responses. Have you ever experienced something that you believe could be paranormal? You don't have to give a detailed answer, but I'd love to hear at least a yes or no in the comments below. If you want to share your story after the episode though, please feel free. It's always nice when someone brings a little tale to our digital campfire here. Okay, where to start with Summerwind? I would say we would start at the beginning, although, as with many aspects of this tale, that is a little unclear. We know the beginnings of the house itself, but what if something was already there, tainting the very land it stood on? Well, that is a little harder to answer, but hopefully we can get into that a little later. It wasn't always known as Summerwind. In fact, for the longest time it was known as the Old Lamont Mansion, due to the house's original owner, Robert Patterson Lamont. Lamont was a wealthy and very successful man from Detroit, Michigan. In the late 1800s, Lamont moved to Chicago. There he met his wife, Helen Gertrude Trotter, and together they had 3 children. Due to his work as vice president of the Simplex Railway Appliance Company, Lamont often found himself traveling between the busy streets of Chicago to the equally chaotic halls of Washington, D.C., a place where he would make many connections. But Lamont needed an escape from this life. He wanted somewhere quiet and clean to raise his children, and that is when he set his heart on the idea of a lavish summer getaway somewhere that could be his sanctuary away from the life that he was currently leading. That is when he discovered Land O'Lakes, although it wouldn't have been called that back in 1916, when Lamont first discovered the place. It was a small town in Wisconsin, on the banks of a beautiful series of lakes. The population, especially back then, was tiny, but Land O'Lakes had become a popular destination for the wealthy to escape the city. It was while there that he found a beautiful plot of land on the banks of West Bay Lake. At the time, it was being used to house a hotel and 4 small cottages for summer vacations. But Lamont instantly got the vision in his mind of a grand, beautiful mansion that he could call his own. Lamont purchased the land from the family that owned it and hired an architectural firm from Chicago to build it. After 2 years, it was complete. A beautiful building containing 20 rooms and multiple outbuildings scattered across the land that cost Lamont $125,000 to complete. He called it Lilac Hills. Lamont was immensely proud of this home, even inviting President Warren G. Harding to come and stay. Lamont's personal successes would continue to grow while owning Summerwind, seeing him ultimately become the Secretary of Commerce for President Herbert Hoover. He would be one of the few residents to not apparently suffer the supposed curse of this mansion. While the Lamonts spent many happy years in the mansion, there was always the small niggling that something was wrong. Very quickly after moving in, the family hired several servants.
Trust the niggle. It's an intuition, like a gut feeling. A niggle. Niggling.
Many of whom stayed in the outbuildings to maintain the property. It all started with smells. The servants would come to Helen and tell her they kept smelling odd odours coming from the inside of the mansion, but could never identify the source of the smells. Then there were the sounds. Whispers in the halls. Footsteps where no one should be. The maids quickly began talking about how they believed that the house was haunted, but Robert's wife simply laughed off these suggestions. The house was brand new. How on earth could it be haunted, if such a thing were even possible?
Ideally.
The Lamonts never gave much credence to these claims by their servants, although you have to wonder what they experienced themselves. Did they hear the sounds? Did they smell the odours? Did they feel the sense that they were being watched wherever they went? We don't know, and the reason for that is that Robert Lamont apparently never liked to talk about his experience of living at Lilac Hills, this beautiful mansion that he loved so dearly. And in fact, in the 1930s, the Lamont family abandoned the mansion, never to return. The incident that led to the Lamonts leaving has been a part of the folklore of Summerwind for so long now, the origin of it is lost to time. Apparently, the reason this story exists, though, is that Lamont told a few of his drinking buddies the tale of what happened on that last night, and then never told another soul until his death in 1948. The Lamont family had owned the mansion for around 15 years at this point. It was one night in the early 1930s. Robert and Helen were sitting alone in their kitchen. They had just returned from a meal and were having a dessert at the table before heading off to bed. Helen paused for a moment. Robert asked what was wrong, but she shrugged it off and said nothing. They continued eating before she then suddenly stopped again. She was sure this time she had heard something. Helen glanced around the room. Then she heard it again. Louder this time. Loud enough that Robert noticed it too. It was the door to the basement. It was rattling. The pair didn't say a word at first. They just stared at the basement door, curious as to what could be making the sound, when it suddenly began to shake violently. Someone was trying to get through the basement door and up into the kitchen. Robert jumped up and grabbed his pistol, slowly edging towards the door, its handle jolting up and down, the hinges almost buckling from the force of whatever it was pushing on it. Helen hid behind her husband. Robert shouted out to ask who was there, but there was no response, just more violent shaking. Then, the door swung open. The Lamonts couldn't believe what they were seeing. Robert later described the sight to his drinking buddies as a ghoul. It looked like a man, but tall. Much too tall to be human. Its dark, shadowy form blocked out the entire doorway into the basement. It appeared to be wearing clothes, but they were all black, and the entire thing seemed to drift and sway, as though it were made from smoke. Helen screamed in terror, and Robert didn't hesitate. He fired 2 shots into the entity that seemed to just pass through it, hitting the partially open door instead. The Lamont turned and ran, gathering their family and quickly leaving the property, never to return. There seems to be some confusion about the status of the property throughout the remaining years of the 1930s. It's commonly said that Lamont refused to sell the property, leaving it empty as it slowly began to rot. The family had left numerous antiques and belongings behind that were all pinched by vandals and thieves who discovered that the mansion had been left. The Lamonts didn't seem to care though. It was as if this once beloved home was dead to them now. However, images exist in a brochure offering people the chance to rent out Lilac Hills. The pictures show the mansion as it looked in the 1930s, although it is possible the brochure is from later and was just using an old photo. Generally though, it appears that the mansion stood empty until Robert Lamont passed away and the Kiefer family purchased the estate from the remaining Lamonts. If the Kiefer family ever lived in the property is also a little unclear, but they are said to be the first recorded victims of the curse of Summerwind. Within 6 months of owning the property, Mr. Kiefer dropped dead, unexpectedly. The family couldn't afford the upkeep of the land, so Miss Kiefer began selling off sections of the estate to different buyers. By the time the 1960s rolled around, all that remained in her possession was the land the old Lamont mansion stood on. But it wasn't through lack of trying. Miss Kiefer kept trying to sell the mansion, time and time again, but every time the new buyers wouldn't be able to keep up with the repayments, and the home would revert back to her ownership. It was as though she could get rid of every part of Lilac Hills, except the mansion for some reason. It seemed like Miss Kiefer wasn't especially fond of the property, although she would never reveal why. It appeared she was fearful to even step into it. She would take prospective buyers to the house, hand them the keys and leave them to tour the property themselves. No one who came to Summerwind has ever said that Miss Kiefer accompanied them on the tour. In the summer of 1969, Ginger Hinshaw was visiting a friend in the area. Much like Lamont all those years earlier, Ginger had fallen in love with the Land O'Lakes and was desperate to find herself a home here. She couldn't believe it when her friend took her to see Summerwind. It was run down at this point, a shadow of its former splendor. But for a house this size, it was a total bargain. Ginger had recently remarried and she saw this as the perfect place to make a new start. Her friend, however, warned her that the house had been mostly empty for 40 years and that the locals had a lot of stories about the property, to the extent that they would refer to it as the old haunted house. Ginger smiled to herself, not taking these stories too seriously, and said, "Well, I guess I'm going to be living in a haunted house." Not long after this, Ginger returned with her husband, Arnold, and 4 children in tow to come and see the house. Miss Kiefer stayed in her car on the drive, but handed the keys over to the couple to take a look around. Arnold, who owned his own construction business, was as taken by the property as Ginger had been. It was stunning. He knew it would need a lot of work, but for the price, this was a no-brainer. They had to buy this house. Ginger's 9-year-old daughter, April, though, had a very different view when she walked in. In later life, she spoke about her first impressions of entering the mansion. Its walls stripped of paint and wallpaper, its floors bare and dirty. It was huge, but dingy and decrepit. She couldn't understand why her mother was so obsessed with the place. From the second she entered, it didn't feel like home. In fact, something inside her told her that they shouldn't be there at all. They were not welcome. Within a month, the family moved in. There was a lot of work to do, but with a little help, Arnold and Ginger were sure they could get the place back in shape quickly. But that was where they ran into their first hurdle. They would contact local tradesmen to come and work on the property. Time and time again, they found that the contractors were up for the work, until they told them the address. Then they would suddenly make an excuse why they couldn't do it, or simply not turn up on the day they were due to begin work. Even getting supplies to the house seemed odd. Delivery drivers wouldn't even drive up the path to the house itself. instead just leaving packages at the gate outside. It was as if none of the locals even wanted to step near the old Lamont mansion, but the newly married couple weren't afraid of a bit of hard work, and set about fixing up the mansion themselves anyway. They restored the fireplace mantle, wallpapered all the rooms, and began restoring the hardwood floors. It was during this time that Ginger made an unusual discovery. She was looking through one of the built-in wardrobes in an upstairs room, when she found a large rolled-up piece of paper. She unravelled it to discover the original blueprints of the mansion, but strangely, there was a Native American peace pipe within the rolled-up blueprints. A little strange, but she had heard stories about how the previous owners had filled the home with many interesting artifacts. This apparently was just one of the few that wasn't looted over its derelict years. The blueprints, though, seemed to have a more profound impact on Ginger. After looking at them, she said her attitude towards fixing up the house changed. This wasn't just about making a nice home for her family anymore. Ginger claimed that she became practically obsessed with restoring the mansion to its former self, making it identical to the home the Lamonts had created. She would spend days comparing paints, trying to find the right one that matched what little still remained on the walls. She said it was like something was guiding her, as though she were no longer in full control of how she decorated the rooms. Interestingly, at the same time, Arnold's interest in restoring the house took the complete opposite direction. He became increasingly unenthusiastic about the whole thing. Ginger noted that he was constantly distracted. He would go to do a job but couldn't keep his focus on that task for more than a few minutes. But Ginger seemingly didn't care. She was single-minded and carried on the work that she felt needed to be done. Soon after moving in, the children began coming to Ginger, saying they felt scared in the house. They claimed it felt like they were being watched at all times, as though they were never alone in any room of the mansion. Ginger would have likely just brushed this off as just the children being unsettled by the move. But she too had begun to notice things. Chairs would seem to move across the kitchen floor when no one was looking, and she too felt like she was never truly alone.
I just need to pause and give some props to Damien, who was on it with the facts. Thank you so much. Usually I'm a teacher, but I appreciate that. I love learning. So
Whispering behind the closed doors was a little harder to explain. She would become convinced that she could hear voices in the rooms upstairs. But when she looked inside, no one would be in there. But surely it was just the talk of ghosts messing with her mind. And that's what she told herself, even when she started to notice the shadows moving out of the corner of her eyes. Arnold noticed them too, as though something were just moving out of the corner of his eye, but when he looked, there was nothing there. They would often see lights flickering, and he kind of assumed that was the cause. Just faulty electrics. Appliances would often break, but when he would go to fix them, they would work fine again. What couldn't be explained by the electrics of the house, though, was what had happened to the car. Arnold was leaving the house to go to a job. When he stepped out of the front door, though, his car that was just a few feet away from him burst into flames. Luckily, he wasn't hurt, but the car was destroyed. They never did find a reason for why it had happened. Arnold was not entertained in the idea of ghosts, though. But ever since he had moved into that house, his personality had completely flipped. He was becoming increasingly withdrawn from his family. The interactions he did have with Ginger and the children were increasingly angry. He would often put his tools down while working and turn around to discover they had vanished. He was convinced it was the children messing with him, and he became enraged with them every time it happened. He then started rarely going into work, instead spending most of his time inside the mansion. The only thing that seemed to bring him joy was his music. Arnold had purchased an organ not long before the family had moved in, and he had begun playing it. But strangely, only at night.
You're being weird.
A common source of Arnold's anger was the window in the master bedroom. No matter how many times he shut it, it would always be open again when he would return to the room. Initially, Arnold began blaming the children for this too. Then he decided that Ginger was responsible, and started yelling at her to stop opening the window. He ultimately nailed it shut. Arnold was convinced that Ginger and the children were messing with him, trying to drive him insane. Ginger, meanwhile, believed Arnold was the one moving furniture around and hiding tools. If he was doing this deliberately or not, though, she couldn't say. He seemed so distracted at all times, like his mind was somewhere else. No one seemed to trust each other anymore. One of the stranger reported incidents took place around this time. One summer day, Ginger and Arnold were painting a closet in one of the bedrooms. At the back was a large shoe drawer that had been built into the wall. Arnold pulled it out so he could paint and noticed a large space behind the drawer. He looked inside with his flashlight and jumped back when he saw something. He couldn't believe it, but he turned to Ginger and said, "I think there's something dead in there." They assumed it was an animal, but the space was too small for either of them to get inside. So instead, when the children got home from school, they asked one of the girls, Mary, to crawl inside and take a look. Mary crawled in briefly before screaming in terror. She was quickly pulled out by Arnold, and the young girl was in hysterics. She claimed it looked like a person, a human skull with remnants of hair still attached.
Terrible.
It seems very unclear about what the family did with this discovery, but seemingly they never contacted the authorities about this potential
Weird.
corpse that was hidden within their walls.
Yeah.
It was after this event, though, that things really turned bad. Arnold's anger grew and grew with each passing week. One of the girls, April, described it as though he were possessed. One of the most upsetting moments for the children involved a pet raccoon that they owned. One night it escaped its cage. Arnold was convinced it was in the woods, and he demanded that the children go out into the woods in the middle of the night to look for it, claiming it was their fault and that he didn't need this extra stress. When the raccoon was finally found, he apparently killed it to, in his words, teach the kids a lesson.
What the fuck?
April said that their stepfather had previously been a kind, caring man, but suddenly it was as if he hated the entire family. He felt like an evil presence in their home. Then Arnold just stopped talking. Ginger would see him walking from room to room, staring at things that weren't there. Arnold was convinced that something was in the home now. Something was toying with him, but he didn't know what it was, or what it wanted. The only thing that would bring him peace was playing the organ, something he would do loudly at all times of the night. The apparitions began to become more vivid too. One day Ginger was alone in the house, a rare time that Arnold had actually left, when she became convinced that she heard a voice as she went to walk upstairs. A man's voice, deep and strong, but there was nobody there. Ginger continued walking upstairs. Again, she heard something in the upstairs hall, but she wasn't sure what it was. She checked all the rooms, but no one was there. She then heard the voice again, but this time it said her name, before seeing what appeared to be some sort of shadowy, human-like figure in the upstairs hall that quickly vanished. This wasn't the only intruder the family was seeing in the home, though. Desperate for a bit of normality to be restored to their lives, Ginger invited a couple of friends around for an evening of socializing. Everything had been going great, although Arnold had kept himself secluded away in another part of the house. But she didn't mind. She was just grateful for some adult company, some people to make this strange fantasy they were creating feel silly. Ginger had gone to the kitchen to grab some more wine. When she returned, though, she found her guests quite troubled. There was a set of French doors that led out from this room to the kitchen. While she had been gone, her friends had seen a woman walk past those doors. Ginger's friends hadn't recognized the woman, and when they went to look, there was no one there. Ginger instantly knew who they were talking about. She had hoped she was losing her mind, but she had seen her too, on more than one occasion. She never looked like a ghost exactly. She looked like a flesh and blood human woman, just casually walking past the French doors, as though her and her family weren't even there. Ginger wasn't alone. Multiple members of the family had claimed to see her, but she for some reason didn't truly believe it until her friends claimed to see her too. Apparently her friends were so freaked out by the incident, they immediately left. They refused to take Ginger's calls going forward. She was now even more alone. Arnold at this point became truly gone. He would never leave the house. He would play the organ all night so loud it kept the entire family awake. The songs he played were described by the children as weird and dark. He would play random notes one after another, off-kilter and unsettling sounding tunes that he seemed to be just making up on the spot for hour after hour. After repeated nights of being unable to sleep, Ginger began begging him to stop, but Arnold said he couldn't. He had to keep playing. The voices he could hear wanted him to keep playing. This was when Ginger began taking herself off into the woods at night. She couldn't explain exactly what had drawn her to them, but it was likely just a desperate need to escape the constant nighttime racket of Arnold's playing. She too was beginning to lose her mind. The sleep deprivation wasn't helping. Whenever she was in the house, she just felt like something was hanging over her, watching her every move. She heard it whispering to her, moving around just out of sight. What's more, she became convinced that the house was changing. Hallways seemed to grow longer as she walked down them. The walls blurred and shifted. It wasn't possible though. It was all in her head. But she felt safer out in the cold woods than she did inside that house. It was in these nighttime outings that Ginger's mind went to a darker place. She considered ending it all, taking her own life. She couldn't handle it anymore. She felt trapped. She couldn't think straight. How had this all gone so wrong? Ginger didn't know it, but she wasn't the only one feeling this way. April stated in a later interview that she and her sister had both discussed the idea of ending their lives too. The atmosphere in the house was so oppressive that now even the young children were considering stepping into the void. It was when winter hit that Ginger finally met her breaking point. She remembers the sound of the cold winter wind so vividly that the sound of wind still scares her to this day. Arnold no longer spoke to anyone. His business was gone, and the family had no money left. The electricity and heating had been cut off due to unpaid bills. A water pump had broken. Arnold was too mentally checked out to fix it, and no contractors would step foot near the house. So Ginger and the children had begun bringing up buckets of water from the lake. The nights had grown so cold they were forced to bring their mattresses and bedding down to the living room so they could all huddle around the fire. Ginger was also becoming increasingly worried that Arnold would end up hurting one of the children. She had previously been too proud to contact her parents and ask for help, but she knew, looking at her family huddled together for warmth, that this had already gone past the point where things like that mattered. She rang her father, and the following day he showed up with a camper van to take Ginger and the children away. April said in a later interview that the moment they stepped out of that house and drove away, it felt like a war had ended. All the dark thoughts faded away. She was free to simply be a child again. Arnold did not leave with them though.
Ready for bed,
He watched from the window as his new family drove off into the distance, and he remained in Summerwind. To my knowledge, Arnold has never spoken about what took place in the house publicly. But soon after his family left, he too left Summerwind for good, checking himself into a mental health facility once he was away from the mansion. He and Ginger divorced soon after, but it seemed no one in the family ever saw Arnold in person again after they left him behind in that mansion. But this wasn't the end of the Summerwind story. Ginger told her father, Raymond Bober, everything that happened in the house, but he didn't believe a word of it. He knew his daughter and his grandchildren had been through a very real trauma, but ghosts? In his mind, Arnold was just not the man she thought he was when they had gotten married. The man was clearly unwell, and his madness had simply affected the rest of them. Ginger, a once skeptic herself though, was now firmly in the believer camp, and over the following years became increasingly obsessed with the paranormal, reading everything she could to try and explain what she had experienced in that mansion. Her father Raymond, however, also became a little obsessed. For some reason, even though 3 years had passed, he couldn't seem to get Summerwind out of his head either. One day he arranged to go and visit the property, taking along his son, Ray Jr. as well. The new owner, who was already looking to sell the mansion, handed Raymond the keys and told him to feel free to look around. She didn't want to get out of the car for some reason. Raymond was instantly captivated by the place. He said it felt like it was in need of love, like a puppy that had been left out in the rain. He had this insatiable urge to care for it, to look after it, to restore it to its former glory. Strangely, Ray Jr. would later say he felt the exact same as they toured the mansion. The last 3 years had not been kind to the property. It had been left empty since Ginger left, and the weather had seemingly taken a toll on it. It looked like the property had been abandoned for decades, not just a few years. But Raymond saw potential. He wanted to buy it and turn it into a hotel and restaurant. Ray Jr. had recently got back from Vietnam, and his father was keen to find something for his son to work on, to reintegrate him back into normal life. Between the two of them, they believed they had enough experience to take on this project. But even from the first time walking around the house, Raymond was unable to shake his daughter's stories. It was all just in his mind, but he still noticed that odd feeling. That feeling of being watched. Raymond broke the news to Ginger, and she was obviously unimpressed by his plans. The children too were worried, scared for the safety of their uncle and grandfather. But Raymond ignored their concerns and purchased the property. Soon after, Ray Jr. began working on the place. He quickly ran into the same issue that Ginger and Arnold were having. Though other contractors would come out to work on the property, he would be alone for much of this endeavour. Raymond also tried to get contractors to come and get involved, but with no luck. Raymond decided to get some initial measurements of the place done, but when he compared the measurements of the rooms to the original blueprint that Ginger had found, he discovered that none of them matched up. In fact, some rooms were double the size listed on the original blueprint, as though the property had grown since the building had been completed. Stranger still, when he remeasured a room, it came out a slightly different size to what he had initially noted down. Obviously a simple mistake, but this kept happening, time and time again, as if the house were constantly expanding and contracting, on any given day being a different size than the previous day, almost as though the house were alive. It was during this time that Raymond came across a sign that read Summerwind, practically buried in the overgrown bushes outside, suggesting this had been the name of the property at some point, although it's unclear when this was the case. Either way, this discovery is why the property is referred to as Summerwind today. After discovering the sign, Raymond looked up at the house and noticed the window in the master bedroom was wide open. Strange, he thought to himself. He was sure he remembered shutting it. Ray Jr. was planning to work on the place for a few days, so he took his father's camper van with him. The house was too run down, so he decided he would sleep in the camper van at night and work during the day. He worked throughout that first day without any incidents. But that evening, he was sitting outside the van enjoying a beer, when he became convinced that he heard a growl. Ray Jr. froze, desperately trying to keep an ear out for the sound. And sure enough, it came again, clearer this time. It was 100% a growl, and it was close. Convinced that it must be bears, Ray Jr. locked himself in the camper van that night. The next day, a thunderstorm hit the area, and Ray Jr. was left on his own on a miserable, rainy day inside Summerwind. But the sounds didn't stop. In fact, they got stranger. Ray Jr. began to follow one of the sounds. A few hours later, Ray Jr. walked into his father's home. Raymond asked his son what he was doing back there. He'd been planning to stay at Summerwind for a few days. Ray Jr. got extremely sheepish and didn't want to talk about it. simply claiming that all his tools weren't working and that he was unable to do anything before rushing off into the other room. Raymond knew that something was wrong with his son, first Ginger and now Ray Jr. Something was off about Summerwind, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. He ended up getting in touch with the prior owner, and she was happy to lay out what she knew about the history of the house, which is how Raymond came to learn about the Lamonts, and the incident where Robert Lamont had attempted to shoot an entity that he saw in his kitchen. All of this sent Raymond's head spinning. Maybe he had been too quick to dismiss his daughter's claims about the paranormal goings-on. But this didn't stop him from pushing on with his plans. A few nights later, Raymond and Ray Jr. were sitting with Ginger, talking through what they were going to do. Raymond had drawn up new blueprints for his planned hotel and was talking Ginger through them, when Ginger noticed that her brother's leg was shaking up and down, and he was violently biting his nails. Ginger asked what was wrong, and her brother said that he had just developed this habit recently. He couldn't stop biting his nails. Ginger could see he was clearly agitated by something, but she had a suggestion for him. She had recently been experimenting with learning hypnosis, and she believed if he would let her, that she could help him stop this nail-biting habit. Ray Jr. agreed, and Ginger held up a pen, asking her brother to focus on it, as she softly spoke to him. Unbeknownst to her, April had overheard the conversation and had crept downstairs, listening in to the whole thing. Once Ray Jr. was under, Ginger started asking him about the mansion. As soon as the topic was brought up, his leg began shaking again. But then something weirder happened. Ray Jr. started speaking in a voice that didn't sound like his own. He kept repeating the same few sentences over and over, his leg violently bumping up and down as he did, almost growling as he spoke. Ginger kept trying to bring him back around, but she couldn't, the voice growing angrier and more aggressive as it went. Eventually, Ray Jr. snapped out of it, and he came back around. He didn't believe Ginger when she told him what happened, but she was able to prove it to him. They had recorded the session. Ginger played the tape back to her brother so he could hear it all. In this rough old voice that didn't sound like his own, Ray Jr. had claimed he was very old. He claimed that he despised weakness. He hated his children, of which he claimed to have 7, although Ray Jr. didn't have any children of his own. Then he kept repeating over and over that his children were weak and that he was very strong, repeating this weird, angry statement over and over until Ginger was able to bring him back around. As the tape ended, Ray Jr. was left shaking and disturbed. He looked up at his sister and father and decided it was time to tell them what made him leave Summerwind the other day. Ray Jr. had walked upstairs to the master bedroom to find someone had left the window wide open. He didn't remember opening it the day before, but he was sure he must have. Either way, due to the thunderstorm outside, rain had been pouring in through the window for quite some time, soaking the floor and leaking out into the hall. Ray shut the window and grabbed a mop, drying first the bedroom before moving out into the hall. He began mopping the floor along the hall, but it was like the water stretched deeper into the house than it should. How had it got all the way down the hall like this? Ray kept mopping and mopping. He said it felt like the hall was getting longer and longer as he walked along with his mop. But he did eventually reach the end. Ray sighed. He was clearly just tired. After the growling sounds, he hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Ray grabbed his mop and went to head back downstairs when he noticed it. Through the doorway into the master bedroom, he could see the window was open yet again, rain pouring in. Ray rushed back, slamming the window shut, and began mopping yet again. And then he heard it, a voice. A voice he was sure had just called his name. Ray Jr. shouted out, asking who was there. He tried to assure himself that maybe his father had showed up, but when he heard the voice again, he knew he didn't recognize it. He thought it was coming from the stairs. so Ray Jr. cautiously walked to the top of them to look down. There was no one. Ray Jr. jumped 6 feet in the air though when he heard 2 sudden loud bangs. Instinctively, he rushed downstairs to the source of the sounds. It was only as he entered the kitchen that he smelt it. Gunpowder. Then he realized it had sounded like a gun had gone off. Suddenly concerned he could be in very real danger here from a possible trespasser, Ray quickly scouted the house and the area directly outside, but could find no trace of anyone. He returned to the kitchen, and that's when he noticed them. 2 small holes in the basement door. They kind of looked like bullet holes. Then, he heard them again. The voices. Ray turned around from the door and he saw something in the kitchen. Something that he struggled to put into words. A shape, a figure. It began rushing towards him. Ray ran as fast as he could, jumped into the camper van and drove back home. He didn't believe in ghosts before, but he did now. Hearing his son's story, Raymond instantly made the connection to the Lamonts and the incident in their kitchen. But this is where the story takes a slightly strange turn. Raymond started to believe now that this was all real, but he didn't see it as something negative. He thought there was something in the house attempting to communicate with them. Raymond asked Ginger to now try the hypnosis on him to see if he too was carrying around any subconscious information about the house. It took Raymond a little longer to fall under the hypnosis, but when he did, he began to describe a vision he was having. He saw himself inside the halls of Summerwind, walking through, headed to the kitchen and down into the basement. While there, he crouched down next to a wall and pulled out a loose brick from the base of the wall. Behind the brick was a gap that seemed to be left there on purpose. He then pulled a small box out. Inside the box was what appeared to be a land grant, dated 1767. The name of the owner read Jonathan Carver. When Raymond came to, he claimed he had no memory of the vision he had just described to his children, nor did he recognize the name Jonathan Carver. But the next day, Raymond headed to the library and began his research. Sure enough, Jonathan Carver was a very real man, an explorer who had been in the area during the 1700s. It was said he had helped arrange a peace deal between 2 warring Native American tribes. As a thank you, Carver had been given the deed to a piece of land by one of the tribes. This was the very land that Summerwind Mansion now stood on. However, it seemed that Carver's descendants were never able to find the document that proved the land was theirs. Ginger became convinced that the ghosts were attempting to communicate this to them, that it was their job to find Carver's deed. The 3 of them then returned to Summerwind the next day, and sure enough, they found the loose brick in the wall in the basement. It was clear that something had been kept in there, but no sign of the box from her father's vision could be found. They searched the house from top to bottom for hours, but couldn't find anything. Defeated, the trio left Summerwind that day, never to return, leaving the mystery unsolved. In 1982, the property was sold yet again. Its new owners were warned of the responsibility of taking on Summerwind, but much like everyone else, they simply laughed it all off. They had plans to turn it into a bed and breakfast, but it was never to be. On Father's Day in 1988, a thunderstorm hit the area. The official verdict from the fire department was that lightning had hit the mansion, likely multiple times, starting a fire. It burnt Summerwind Mansion to the ground, leaving behind just its imposing large chimney stacks as a lasting monument to the beautiful house that had once stood there. Over the years, the legend of Summerwind has grown and grown, and to this day, paranormal investigators still visit the site, hoping to experience something for themselves. It seems the area has a profound effect on those that visit, with many claiming to feel sick when they enter the former grounds of the mansion. Others claim to hear strange sounds, and some even see someone But more often than not, it would appear whatever is still residing in the shadow of Summerwind is not Jonathan Carver at all. Even before the mansion would burn down, people would claim to see her. A woman staring out of one of the windows, looking down. Potentially the same woman that had paced up and down outside Ginger's kitchen. To this day, this woman is one of the more widely reported sightings at Summerwind. But who is she? Well, to get into that, there appears to be a secondary piece of folklore surrounding the Lamont family and their history with this property. But I thought I would get my good friend Cody from Mystery Archives to tell you all about that.
We're going to stop right there. He's been so patient. My kitty cat. So I'm going to give him some snuggles. Yes, here I know you're ready for bed. 1, 2, 3. I'll see you guys